This program does not represent the views of this station and may be considered offensive to some listeners. This program may contain mature subject matter, including frank discussions of controversial topics. It is intended for mature, open-minded audiences. Discretion is highly advised. This program is entirely independently produced by and is copyrighted by Frank. It is broadcast here under license.
Hi, this is Nancy LeClerc from Unité, Montréal, and you're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles.
Listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. On today's show we have Nancy LeClerc, who represents the organization Unité Montréal. Welcome to the studio, Nancy.
Thank you, Frank.
Let's go right into the interview.
Okay.
What is Unité Montréal?
It's an association that caters to the Montreal area bisexual community. And thus far, most of our clientele is, well, not clientele because it doesn't really cost anything to come to our activities, but most of the people who come to our activities are mostly francophones, but we're having more and more anglophones. So I think it's safe to say that it's getting closer to being a bilingual as well as bisexual association. And we provide, discussion groups, activities, all kinds of things.
Would you categorize it as a dating service for bisexual people?
Definitely not. That is not really our goal. It's the kind of thing, what we tell people is that, like any other social group, it's quite possible that you might meet somebody there, as you would at work or at any social group, but it's not the point of the association. It's really for people to network and make friends and just feel a little bit less isolated than they normally would. So people who come to try to pick up are usually kind of disappointed because it's a very different dynamic than that.
You mentioned the word isolation, and can you tell me how does isolation play into the life of a bisexual person?
It could if the person has never met any other bisexuals and they're questioning themselves as to the validity of this particular sexual orientation, and if they feel that they have no models or nobody to really express themselves with. What happens often is that if they go to gay or lesbian groups, sometimes they'll feel a little bit outcast because if they want to talk about their opposite sex attraction in addition to their same sex attraction, there's a risk of being ostracized. It's getting better. The queer community is becoming more accepting, but there is always a little bit of a factor of, even in the queer community where I'm supposed to feel comfortable, I still don't completely fit in. So that can play into it quite a bit, in addition to the regular homophobia that most queers have to deal with. So that's what I would say in terms of isolation.
What would you describe the life of someone who is bisexual but hasn't yet met another bisexual?
It's hard to say. I've met people who have never met another bisexual before and who didn't really worry about it too much because they were perfectly comfortable with it. So if the person's comfortable with it, it probably wouldn't be a huge issue. But for somebody who might come from a background where any non-heterosexual orientation was really taboo to talk about and they had nobody with whom to feel comfortable, they might feel quite a bit intimidated or ostracized from pretty much all directions. So I'm guessing it would be a little bit lonely, a little bit scary, quite a bit intimidating.
I'd like to turn the attention to something a little bit more personal, so that our listeners can get the benefit of your own personal experience. Are you bisexual?
Yes, I am.
All right. When did you first discover that you weren't either heterosexual or gay?
It's kind of a long, twisted process, but I'll try to wrap it up in a nutshell. When I was about 7 or 8 when I started thinking about sexuality, and right away I knew that there was an attraction to girls. I mean, I would have these ideas in my head of being with girls and of being with boys, and sometimes I would be a boy, or sometimes I would be a girl. It really varied quite a bit, but I was at this Catholic school, and right away I knew instinctively from what was going on around me that this was something that I had to kind of submerge and not really talk about. So I kind of submerged it for a long time. It's really when I was in my late teens that these thoughts started to come back again, and mostly through fantasy. I mean, it just came about kind of unexpectedly, because I would just be, having my usual fantasies with guys or something, and then one fine day, this woman just magically appeared in my fantasy, and it was like, what the heck are you doing there? And that kind of freaked me out a little bit, because I didn't know the term bisexual at all. I didn't know it was possible. I just knew lesbian, and that was... lesbian would be the worst possible thing in the world to be, to me, at that point, at 16 or 17. So I submerged it again, and it was in about my early 20s when I started to accept it more. I took a women's studies class at university. I met real live lesbian and bisexual women who were proud about it and who didn't think it was anything nasty, and so I started to really accept that about myself. Before I had ever even been with a woman, it was all in my head, and I kind of knew that this was okay. And
I'd like to talk about your upbringing. You mentioned that you had gone to Catholic school. Where were you born? And can you share with us some of those elements of your upbringing that you found maybe challenging dealing with your bisexual thoughts?
Okay. Well, I was born in Sherbrooke, Quebec, but I actually grew up in a small town called Fishkill, New York, which is about halfway between Albany and New York City. And yes, I was put into a Catholic school, and obviously I learned all the usual things about sexuality wasn't really talked about much. I mean, they even avoided talking about the reproductive system. They talked about the nervous system and the digestive system, but we can't talk about reproduction, so it was kind of right away, sexuality was this big taboo thing, along with all the social clues saying that you're not supposed to touch yourself in that way, and so that contributed to me being quite a bit sheltered about sexuality into maybe my early teens, and being really shy to talk about anything about sexuality. Even my mother wanted to tell me about the birds and the bees, and I didn't want to hear her talk about it, so I just went and read it all about it in an encyclopedia instead. So it actually started quite innocently. A friend and I were working on Saturn for a science project, and we saw sex, and we just, because I'm pure and innocent, so. But I digress.
Thank you for digressing. Okay, so you grew up in a sheltered environment. The topic never even came up, and then one day you find you're having these fantasies. When did you first meet let's say, your very first girlfriend?
Actually, I was about 26 or so, maybe 25 or 26, I don't remember exactly, and it was somebody I met through an internet dating site, and I knew at this point that I really wanted to try it out with a woman. It wasn't a question of validating my bisexuality, because I wasn't one of these people who felt that I needed to experience it to know. I knew I was attracted to women and men, and it wasn't a question of doing anything or not. So I corresponded with this woman for a while online. We finally met and had a few experiences, and that didn't really work out well, but I nevertheless knew that this was going to be part of my experience, and I was going to continue in that direction.